Welcome to our COVID-19 interview series called Rise to Meet the Moment, where we are talking with a number of people about behavioral health, especially about behavioral health in this era of COVID and what it is that each and every one of us can do to meet that moment. I'm Carmela Coyle, and I serve as the president and CEO of the California Hospital Association. And this effort is part of the work that I have the privilege of engaging in, co-chairing Behavioral Health Action, which is a coalition of organizations, all who have some connection to and touch in some way the issue of behavioral health. And I'm joined today by my co-chair, Jessica Cruz. Jessica.
Thank you so much, Carmela. And I am the CEO of NAMI California and a proud co-chair with Carmela of BHA. And joining us today is Lenny Mendonca. He's the former Chief Economic and Business Advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom. And he is one of California's most respected public policy voices and has played an integral role in working with some of California's most leading nonprofits. And he's here today to talk to us about his most consequential and courageous life decision. Lenny, thanks so much for taking the time with us today.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Carmela. It's good to be with you.
Well, let's just jump right into it and talk about your story. Our stories are so powerful in not only reducing stigma for others and sharing and normalizing our behavioral health issues, but it also is healing for us. So in April, you stunned much of California's capital community by announcing your resignation as the Chief Economic and Business Advisor to the governor. And in your press release, you had mentioned that you wanted to focus on family and some personal business. Well, we fast forward to July, where you had the courage to write an op-ed for Cal Matters, which really told your personal and poignant story about your decision. What kind of led you to deciding to share your story publicly?
Well, in April, I had decided to resign from my position and largely went dark for 8 weeks and had used that time to recover from a pretty severe bout of anxiety and depression. And I had told a few very close friends, but had largely left the story that I had just resigned for personal reasons. And as I started to feel better and was out extending the people that I was telling the story, I decided to write it down so that I could send it to people before I talked to them so that they could not be surprised when I talked to them. And I got encouraged to edit it and share it more publicly. And I felt the need to try and help get the story out in my words. And so I decided to write it with that encouragement and put it in Cal Matters.
Wonderful.
And Lenny, I might ask, your piece in Cal Matters, your willingness to talk about this certainly sparked a lot of conversation, whether that was within government, within the media, within the business community. Could you talk a little bit, because the reactions have been interesting, could you talk a little bit about how you thought people might react? How did you expect they would react? And talk a little bit more about what you have been hearing from folks, please.
So I honestly didn't know what the reaction would be. I was sure that I would reach out from friends and former colleagues that I had not had a chance to talk to personally, and I got that. But I've probably written 75 or 100 editorials in my life, and this one was an order of magnitude more received with people reaching out to me. And so I had heard from a large number of people, many of whom I didn't know in both the business world and policy world, in the first instance, thanking me for being prepared to share the story, but in many circumstances also sharing their own personal story. And it felt much more intimate than anything else I've ever written, because people were telling me things that, you know, I wouldn't be telling a stranger if they didn't feel some comfort. So it was encouraging in the sense that it clearly hit a nerve. It was discouraging in the sense that a number of the responses also included someone saying that a family member, a very close friend, a colleague had similar issues and did not have a good outcome and get the kind of response that they wanted. And I had a few people say that it encouraged them to speak up and do something and get some help right away. So I didn't know what to expect. I thought it would be something that a few people who knew me would be intrigued by, but the response was just frankly pretty overwhelming in mostly a good way, of people saying, thanks for telling your story and encouraging other people to do it.
Well, and what a great example in that single act, in that single op-ed, you became a myth buster. And I wonder if I could, in the op-ed you wrote, and I'm quoting, "I'm sharing my story because we have too few business and public leaders making public space to discuss mental health, destigmatize destigmatize professional shame, and protect against the resulting economic impact it can have on people's careers and our economy as a whole. The conversation is overdue and urgent." And I wonder if you talk a little bit, please, two important things in that you wrote, stigma being one and urgency being the other. Talk a little bit about stigma and perhaps your experiences with stigma before this bout of anxiety and depression happened with you, stigma before your op-ed piece, and talk about the urgency, if you wouldn't mind, please.
So this was, I'm a newcomer to this territory. This was first experience that I've had with the behavioral health system, first time I'd had any close interaction personally. And so at one level, it felt like an experience that I had when I broke my leg mountain biking. It was, an injury or an illness that you needed to get treated. And when I talked about mountain biking and breaking my leg, and people can see it when they see you, and just felt like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I hope you're going to get better and everything will be fine. And in this case, it was people were more, I don't even know how to start the conversation. And so it felt much more to me like something that we should be talking about. It's, a health issue just like anything else. And if you can't name it and talk about it and have an open dialogue around what you're doing to treat it, it's not going to go anywhere. And so I was fortunate to have family and friends who recognized the issue and got me great urgent treatment. I had good health coverage and I'm doing great now. And, unfortunately, I don't think that's the common occurrence, and which is really, it was troubling before. It's even more troubling in the environment we have today, is where people are isolated and under enormous amount of stress and can experience these things without knowing what to do about it. And certainly if I had not had people close to me recognizing and intervening, I wouldn't have known what to do. And so to me, that just, and I'm, pretty well tuned into these things. And if that happened to me, it can happen to others. So I do think it's something that at a minimum, we ought to be able to have the conversation. And if that was true before COVID, it's absolutely true now, when there's a large number of people doing what we're doing and talking isolated in their homes.
And if I may just add a thought before I turn it back to Jessica. I've been in conversations, more and more people are having, and this COVID crisis is really creating a mountain of pressure on everyone. But I hear more and more people referring to, I hit the wall, experiencing feelings they had never experienced before. And to your point, not necessarily knowing what to do with those feelings, but that instant react, I've just got to push through. I've just got to push through. Talk a little bit about the urgency, which I'm feeling that we have many leaders in particular who may feel like they're hitting the wall and not understand how to interpret that.
Well, I think at least based on the reaction I got and a number of people who wanted to talk live about it, it is much more common and more pronounced today. That was a little bit of on a number of people, the way to enter the conversation was, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now. And particularly for senior people in organizations, a lot of what I got was, if I'm feeling that, I'm probably amplifying it to the rest of my organization. And as both a responsible adult to be able to deal with the issue personally, but also for what you magnify throughout your team and the broader organization, a lot of what I heard was a desire to say, we need to leave space in these Zoom calls for a real honest conversation about how we're all doing, and also set some boundaries around our personal life and our work life, and set some time to recharge and just get self-care. And that's a lot of what I heard. And I actually got more response from CEOs and senior business people saying that they appreciated it and sent it around their organization as an excuse to at least open the dialogue around the challenge of operating in today's environment and all the stress and strain that comes with that.
Thank you for that leadership advice.
Yeah, and I might want to jump in on it a little bit with this question too, kind of around this advice for people who are in these high stress type of environments, not only sharing their story, but I would love to hear from you as a business leader and somebody who's been in these kind of senior executive positions. What kind of advice would you give for organizations to make that first step in allowing that space?
Well, it's, I think it's incumbent on the people at the top of the organization to role model that this is important. If they're not doing it, not taking time to take care of themselves, not setting boundaries, not setting the right examples, and not being open and honest about the importance and willingness to have those conversations, it's going to be really hard for more junior people to do it. So a lot of the conversations that I've had are with people at the top saying, as I said, they sent my article around, or an article that was in the Wall Street Journal about these issues, just so that it feels like it's a business issue and that it's okay to talk about it. As opposed to it's a touchy-feely thing that we'll save for our next offsite that we're not going to have for a very long time. So in the first instance, to me, it's just make space for the conversations. I mean, this country more than others, kind of the answer is, you're in a work environment judged by how hard you work, not how balanced are you and how complete a human being are you. And being able to say, even more so now when there's no boundaries, you got to establish those, or you're going to end up risking burning out your team and your organization. This is a marathon, not a sprint on the virus and everything it's affecting. So that would be my first advice, is just have a real conversation. And you may need some facilitation or somebody else to help you with that, because it's not always the easiest thing to open up about. But it's something that ought to be part of conversations. There's other things that I'm not, an expert in, how that you guys would know much more about how do you do this in a specific sense. But to me, this is just like any other issue, that if it's prevalent and no one's talking about it, you're never going to address it unless you first talk about it.
That's really good. And I think that the stigma has a huge factor in it, right? Because opening up that conversation around, having behavioral health challenges, you don't know kind of who you're talking to and what their education is about behavioral health, right? And so moving into kind of the conversation around where we're at with COVID and this kind of, we talk about it as a tsunami. Like COVID is like a tsunami, and we're in like the first wave, and then the third wave is really going to hit, and it's usually the biggest wave, which is going to consume us of behavioral health challenges, right? We're all inside Zooming, not being able to have that personal connection. In a lot of cases, there's the socioeconomic factors. People are losing their jobs. I had children starting school today that, created some very interesting back and forths with, distance learning and things like that. And so I'm wondering how we can focus on the stigma around it. And honestly, you just sharing your story, not only in your op-ed, but continuing that conversation with those individuals, and here with us today is really break down those walls I'm just wondering, how do you think that focusing on stigma can help people face these challenges? And then especially as we just talked about in the business world, opening the conversation is one thing, but then reducing that stigma is another. So how do you think we can face those challenges?
I had a few of the people that were close to me, when I shared an early version of my story, say, keep that to yourself and don't tell anybody else, because if you do, it will be, you'll forever be labeled that, and it'll be career ending, and you'll not want to be having any conversation, because that's all people want to talk about. And to me, that just reinforced my belief that that was the wrong answer, that holding something inside was not the way to deal with it. And I mean, honestly, it doesn't feel like a big deal to me to be saying this, but for other people, when senior people say something, and Michelle Obama saying that she's having challenges with low-grade depression, you have a different conversation. My experience, at least in the business world and in the high-powered professional world, whether that's in government or in sports, it's just still not a conversation that people have in anything other than very, very private and personal conversations. And so, that just doesn't seem like a good answer. And I think there were a number of people who have talked with me about trying to create a broader group of people who are out there saying, have that conversation, and in senior positions to help encourage others to do it in the business world. And I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. And if I may, real quickly before turning it to Carmela, I love that you say that it's almost like, no, that answer is not good enough. Like, we need to think of different ways and innovative ways to think about this and to talk about this. And so you saying that, at least in my role, in my position, means so much, because it means that we have champions like you saying, no, it's not good enough, and we need to start sharing this, and we need to break down those walls. So thank you so much, Lenny.
It's interesting. We talk in our organization around culture, and we use the analogy of beach balls. And that is, if you try to hold a beach ball down underwater, you might be able to do one of those and do it successfully. But when you've got multiples, it's just too difficult to do. And the pressure it puts on you to try to accomplish that is just challenging. And I also appreciate, Lenny, your analogy to the marathon. I have heard folks refer in the business world to the fact that we have to be corporate athletes. And I think that's the wrong analogy. Exactly to your point, we have to set boundaries. We have someone on our team who is an ultra runner. These are folks who run beyond a marathon, 50 and 100 miles. But to your point, Lenny, it's not just about the discipline that's important. And it's not just about the performance and training, but it's about your underlying health. And there is no athlete who can do what they need to do if they don't have all three of those pieces. So Lenny, if I might, could I ask you to share a little bit more of your story? Perhaps talk a little bit about then, how you were feeling. Talk a little bit, if you're willing to, about now and how you're feeling. And if you would, perhaps describe some of the care you're receiving, and just talk about that progression over the last number of weeks, if you would.
So my daughters were actually the one who encouraged me to write something down as part of a recovery process, not necessarily to share it with anybody, but just part of being able to describe what happened. Once I wrote it down, it definitely helped in the sense of being able to describe the experience. And then when I started having the conversations with expanding circles of friends, that was definitely helpful. To me, being able to step back, get some recharging time, get more sleep, I've been out every day since Memorial Day on either a bike ride or a hike, getting out in the fresh air and getting some exercise has definitely helped a lot. I have regular conversations with the doctor, and it's medication. All those things add up. I can't tell you individually what contributed to what, but collectively I'm doing great. It feels like a long time ago, which is good. And just moving forward on trying to look forward, not necessarily look back. But part of what the writing it was part of that process for sure, and definitely having the conversations is part of it too.
Well, and it's so challenging, and even more challenging, I do think, in this COVID environment where night is day and day is night, and Monday is Tuesday and Tuesday is Friday. And we don't have those visual cues, not even the, get up in the morning and take a shower and get in the car and go to work. We've kind of lost all of those natural touch points that almost makes it difficult to realize sometimes what's happening to us. And I don't know if there were any signs. Would you say you picked up on them early or picked up on them late?
No, I definitely picked up on them late. As I said, this was a new experience to me, and I wasn't recognizing what was going on. Now in retro, it was clearer. I was exhausted and running, burning the candle on both ends, and feeling like it was too much responsibility on my shoulders. And this was in March and early April, at the real early and deeply challenging days of the virus and the economy, and it was deeply challenging. And so it was, in retrospect, I needed to step back a little bit and get some distance, and I have now. So but at the time, it definitely didn't feel like anything that I could influence.
Well, we are so pleased with where you are now. I'm struck. It was one of the things you wrote about, and it's something Jessica and I talk about a lot. 1 in 3 Californians somehow is touched by, connected to behavioral health, that is mental illness or substance abuse challenges. And it's almost like saying, I'm a woman, 1 in 2, folks are a woman, and I'm just going to pretend I'm not. And it's how do we bring that right out and into the forefront when so many of us are affected by it? It's back to stigma and all the challenges that we have. We are so grateful with you in your leadership position in particular, willing to step out. Maybe another question. Thoughts that you may have had. We are fortunate, Jessica and I, in this community that you're speaking to. We've got organizations statewide who have come together to say, we've got to do things differently as it relates to behavioral health. We talk about elevating the issue, educating about the issue, and innovating around how we deal with it. Anything you've seen that we could or should be doing differently or better? I'll share a short story we had at one of our meetings. We realized sometimes even in the provider community, we're adding to the stigma, because we'll say, here's a separate waiting room you can come into, right? And no one will see you come into that waiting room, and you can exit here. What is our own role in creating stigma? Your thoughts, you've mentioned insurance issues and others. Thoughts about places where we can all do better together.
So, as I said, I'm relatively new to this territory, and I don't profess to have any deep knowledge of what common experiences are. If mine was any indication, it felt like it required a advocate on your behalf to navigate the system. I was fortunate to have great health coverage, so it was less the affordability than it was access to the right kind of treatment. And fortunately, I did have that in my wife and other family members and friends who were helping navigate the system. But without that, I don't know how someone who's got a real challenge figures out and works their way through this, even if they're fortunate enough to have good coverage. As I said, when I broke my leg, it was pretty obvious that I needed to go to the hospital and have an x-ray and figure out what to do about it. In this circumstance, that wasn't at all obvious to me, certainly. It was more obvious to people who knew how to recognize it. And so, having a way to ensure that it's part of everyone's coverage and that they do have access to high quality care. It's not a short-term kind of quick in and out thing either. And so that's not necessarily how our system's set up. So ensuring that we have ability to have the conversation, have coverage, and have access to high quality, longer term care to deal with these issues, to me, feels like the right thing to do, but probably less common than it should be.
Thank you. And perhaps a last question. Talk a little bit about next steps for you, and we'll give you the opportunity if you have any advice for others. And I think actually most of us are unfamiliar with these issues, these challenges, what to do. But next steps for you, and what advice might you give to anyone who's listening?
So next step for me is I'm going to have my second granddaughter next week, hopefully. And so just quarantining and staying disciplined so that we can meet her when she's born. And then I'm going to ending my, I had told everyone I was going to take a sabbatical until Labor Day and the birth of my granddaughter to recharge and then figure out what's next. And so I don't know what's next. I'm not going back into government full time. I'll be doing a range of things probably, but I'll figure that out as I head back into things in September. And again, my advice is really just have the conversation. I mean, being able to, in a safe space with people that are trying to deal with these challenges in a constructive way, as opposed to brushing it aside or saying tough it out, I think is my strongest piece of advice. And if you get a response within your organization that that's not an okay conversation, go someplace else. And just sucking it up and dealing with it yourself is absolutely the wrong answer. I had to be forced to go get help. That was a great answer, but it wouldn't have been my first response, particularly for someone being the person that everybody turns to about what to do. Being able to have that kind of support and help is really important as well. So reach out. There's great help available if you get it. And certainly this is a complicated area to get the kind of help and support you need, but at least if my experience was anything, we can work our way through it and get on with life.
Well, that is great advice. And we'd like to thank you, Lenny, for joining us today and for sharing your story. It is a story that is filled with inspiration and with extraordinary courage, particularly your ability to advise other leaders here in the state of California and nationally. We so appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
So Rising to Meet the Moment is a production of Behavioral Health Action. This is a coalition of 50+ organizations in the state of California, all coming together to raise awareness about behavioral health issues in the state of California. Thank you for joining us as part of our Behavioral Health Champions series. And on behalf of Jessica, me, and the entire Behavioral Health Action group, we wish you well, and we thank you for your time.